This happened back in 2018 when I was 24 and living in a low-income apartment complex just outside of Dallas, Texas. I just started a new job and couldn't afford much, so the place I rented was nothing fancy, small, a little run down with flickering hallway lights and thin walls, but it was what I could manage at the time. The complex was made up of 3 buildings, each 4 stories tall, and most of the tenants kept to themselves. I didn't know many of my neighbors except for the guy who lived directly across the hall, a quiet older man named Jerome who walked with a cane and always nodded when we passed each other. Everything was normal for the first 2 months. I worked nights at a hospital, usually getting home around 3 or 4 in the morning. That's when I started noticing him. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. I'd step off the elevator and walk down the hallway toward my apartment, and there he'd be, some guy I didn't recognize, just standing near the stairwell at the end of the corridor. He never said anything, never moved, just stood there in the shadows. The first time I saw him, I thought maybe he was waiting for someone. But then the next night, he was there again, same spot, same silence, standing completely still, half in the dark. I tried not to think much of it. Told myself maybe he was a neighbor with insomnia or something, but he was always there at the exact same time every night, and he never acknowledged me, not even when I nodded or muttered a polite, "Hey." He just stood there watching. One night, maybe 2 weeks after I first noticed him, I decided to walk a little slower as I passed, just to see if he'd react. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but I swear to God, as I unlocked my door, I could hear him breathing, deep, labored, like he was angry. That night, I called the leasing office the next morning and asked if anyone else had complained about a man loitering in the hallway. The lady on the phone said no, but she'd send someone to check the cameras. I never heard back from them. 2 nights later, things escalated. It was around 3:45 a.m. I had just gotten home and was standing in front of my door when I realized I didn't hear anything behind me. Usually there was at least a bit of sound, someone's TV, plumbing, the hum of the building, but it was dead quiet. I turned around. He was closer this time. Not at the end of the hall like usual, but maybe 20 feet away, standing dead center in the hallway. No light behind him. His face was still hidden in shadow. I froze. Keys in hand, half in the lock. Heart in my throat. He just stood there, and then he took a step forward. That broke me. I fumbled the door open and slammed it shut, locking the bolt and chain. I backed away from the door and grabbed the small knife I kept in my kitchen drawer. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold on to it. I called 911. The dispatcher was calm. Asked if he'd threatened me. I said no, not directly, but he was following me, watching me, getting closer. They said an officer would be dispatched. 10 minutes later, a cop knocked on my door. I let him in and explained everything. He walked the hallway, knocked on a few doors, came back and told me he didn't find anyone. There's no loitering or trespassing if it's a tenant, he said. You sure he didn't live here? I told him I didn't know. I'd never seen him anywhere else. He gave me a dismissive nod and told me to call again if it escalated. Then he left. The next night I got home and braced myself, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. For the first time in over a week, I felt relieved. Until around 5:30 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of someone knocking softly on my door. Not loud, not frantic. Just a slow, deliberate knock, 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 followed by silence. I grabbed the knife again and crept to the peephole. No one was there. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I bought a small security cam and mounted it above my door. It was cheap but functional, hooked up to an app on my phone. That night when I got home, I opened the app and set it to record. Nothing happened for hours. Until 4:12 a.m., I woke up to the alert ping on my phone. Motion detected. The clip showed a figure, tall, slim, with a hood pulled low over his face, approach my door. He didn't knock this time. He just stood there, not facing the camera, but facing the door itself, like he was listening. Then he leaned forward and put his mouth right up against the peephole. He stayed that way for over a minute before finally turning and walking away. I called the police again and showed them the clip. The officer who showed up this time was younger, nicer. He watched the video, frowned, and said, "That's definitely not normal." But again, there was nothing they could do. "No crime's been committed," he told me. "We can't do anything unless he tries to break in or threatens you. Just stay alert, okay?" That's when I asked if they could at least run the video by the building manager or check if the guy was a tenant. The officer said they'd look into it and left. I never heard back. 2 nights later, I came home and found something under my door. It was a folded piece of lined paper, no envelope, just one sentence, scrawled in jagged all-caps letters. "The cops leave, but I don't." I moved out 2 days later, left most of my stuff behind, slept on a friend's couch until I could get a new place. I still don't know who that man was. I don't know if he lived there. I don't even know if he ever really left. But I do know this. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you can't. And that's a terrifying thing to realize. This happened to my Aunt Grace about 15 years ago in a small town in Oregon. I was just a kid when it happened, but I remember the fear in her voice when she called my mom late one night. It wasn't like her to panic, but that night she was crying so hard she could barely speak. Grace had moved to the town to get away from a messy divorce. She bought a little house at the edge of a wooded neighborhood. Quiet, peaceful. She liked her privacy. The house next door had been empty when she moved in, but about 3 months later, someone new moved in. A man in his 50s, gray hair, lived alone. Grace said he seemed a little odd but polite. He introduced himself as Don, said he used to be a truck driver, now retired. At first, he just waved from his porch. Then he started striking up short conversations when Grace checked her mail or watered her plants. Nothing inappropriate, just small talk. Then it got weird. Grace said he began popping up more often, always seeming to know when she was outside. He just happened to be checking his trash bins or adjusting his sprinkler system whenever she was in her yard. She started to feel watched. Then came the gifts. It started with a pie, just a store-bought apple pie, left on her porch with a note that said, "Thought you might like this. Don." Grace never touched it. Next, a wind chime hung directly on her porch railing. Then a photo of her taken from behind while she was gardening. No note this time, just the picture slid under her front door. That's when she called the police. They came out, took a statement, and even paid Don a visit. According to Grace, he acted totally innocent. Said he was just being neighborly, that maybe she was misunderstanding his intentions. The cops told her to document everything and call again if it escalated. So she did, but nothing stopped. One night, Grace was walking through her house, turning off lights before bed. She passed by her bathroom window and saw a silhouette in the bushes just outside, a human shape crouching low. She turned on the floodlights and called 911. By the time police arrived, the figure was gone. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, just broken branches where someone had clearly been hiding. Again, they couldn't do much. Could be kids messing around, they said. Maybe just a homeless guy passing through. Grace was terrified. She borrowed a gun from a friend and started sleeping with it on her nightstand. She also installed motion detectors around her property, one outside her bedroom window, one covering the backyard, and one by the front porch. The next incident came 2 weeks later. She was asleep when she woke up to the chime of the front door sensor. She grabbed the gun and looked at the camera feed. There was a man standing in the middle of her yard, not on the porch, just standing still in the dark, facing the house. He didn't move, didn't try to break in, just stared. Then the screen went black. Someone had cut the power. Grace bolted her door and locked herself in the bathroom. She called the cops again, whispering into the phone while pointing the gun at the door. Her voice was shaking so badly that the dispatcher had to calm her down just to get her address. When police finally arrived, the man was gone. Again, they checked the fuse box. Someone had yanked several wires. Deliberate, careful. This time, they took it more seriously. A report was filed. A patrol car was assigned to check her street twice nightly for the next week. Grace stayed with my mom for a few days after that. But here's where it gets really disturbing. When she returned home, she decided to install better cameras, higher resolution, night vision, everything. A professional came out to do the job. While walking the property, the installer found something wedged in the crawl space vent under the house. It was a sleeping bag, a flashlight, an empty bottle of water, food wrappers, a notebook. Someone had been living under her house. The notebook had pages and pages of ramblings, scribbled phrases like, "She doesn't know yet," "Soon, but not yet," "She's mine, she just doesn't see it." And worst of all, the police can't stop fate. Grace called the cops immediately. When they arrived, they took the bag and the notebook, but that was it. No fingerprints, they said. No evidence of forced entry. Hard to charge someone if we don't catch them in the act. Grace was beyond furious. She begged them to question Don again. The officer sighed and said, "Ma'am, I don't think your neighbor is the one doing this." Grace blinked. "Why not?" "Because Don passed away 2 weeks ago," he said. "Heart attack. The coroner removed the body. The house is empty." Grace's stomach dropped. She realized she hadn't seen Don for a while, but just assumed he was out of town or keeping to himself. "So who was the man talking to me in the yard?" she asked. The cop just shrugged. "That's what we'd like to know." Grace moved out 2 days later. To this day, she has no idea who that man was. The one who watched her, talked to her, left her gifts, or how long he had been living under her home, pretending to be someone who was already dead. She never found out. And the police, they never found him either. Back in 2016, I was attending college in Chicago and living in a medium-sized apartment complex just off campus. The building wasn't luxurious, but it was secure. Key card entry, working intercoms, and 24-hour desk staff. I shared the unit with my roommate, Drew, and everything had been normal for the first year, until we got a call from the front desk one night that changed everything. It was a Friday around 10:30 p.m. We were lounging in the living room, watching a horror movie ironically, when my phone rang. The front desk was calling to say a Mr. Thomas from apartment 309 had reported hearing screaming and crying coming from our unit. Drew and I looked at each other confused. We hadn't been loud, just talking and watching TV. "I'm sorry," I told the desk guy, "but we're not making any noise. It's just the two of us, and everything's normal here." He apologized, said he'd let Mr. Thomas know, and hung up. No big deal, until it happened again, and again, and again. Over the next 3 nights, we received 5 more calls. Each time, it was the same thing. Mr. Thomas in 309 says he hears screaming and crying from your unit. But there was never any noise. The 6th time, I asked the front desk worker if they had actually heard any noise themselves. No, he said. We only respond to complaints. He's the only one who said anything. Finally, Drew and I decided to talk to this guy ourselves. Just clear the air and figure out what was going on. So the next morning, we went to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door of apartment 309. No answer. We waited, knocked again, still nothing. So we left a note, just something polite, saying we weren't sure what he was hearing, but we'd appreciate talking about it directly. The note was still on the door the next day. We mentioned it to the desk staff again, and this time, the woman behind the counter gave us a weird look. Wait, apartment 309? We nodded. She pulled up her computer, squinted, and said, "That unit's been vacant for over 8 months. We just stood there in silence. I told her we'd been getting calls, supposedly from a guy in that unit, for almost a week. She looked freaked out, said she'd double-check the records and get back to us. 2 days later, we got a knock at our door. It was a man in a gray suit, mid-40s, serious face, introduced himself as a private investigator, said he was working on behalf of the building's parent company. We invited him in, and he asked us to recount everything, every call, every incident, every attempt we made to contact this Mr. Thomas. When we finished, he looked exhausted. He said something I'll never forget. "You're not the first tenants to experience this." He explained that over the last year, multiple residents on our floor had reported strange phone calls from the front desk, messages supposedly relayed from apartment 309, but every time they checked, the unit was empty. The building had even gone so far as to disconnect the intercom line for 309 entirely. The door was sealed, no tenant, no activity, but the calls kept happening, and every single time the message was the same: screaming and crying, coming from your unit. We asked the investigator if the police had ever been involved. He nodded. They did a full sweep of 309 months ago, found nothing, no signs of entry, no evidence of squatters, just an empty apartment. But how are the calls happening? Drew asked. The man just shook his head. That's why I'm here. The building wants to rule out system errors, but he trailed off. That night, something changed. Around 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the intercom buzzing. Not ringing, buzzing. It was continuous, harsh, like someone was jamming the button. I grabbed my phone and checked the app that logged intercom activity. Incoming call, Unit 309. I froze. I didn't answer, just stared at the screen until the buzzing finally stopped. Then a voicemail came through. The building system auto-recorded unanswered intercoms. I played it on speaker. It was faint, distorted, but I swear I heard a voice whisper, "Let me in. Please, it won't stop." I couldn't sleep. Neither could Drew. We stayed up until sunrise, watching the door, listening for anything. The next morning, we went back to the front desk with the recording. They looked at the log, then at us. There was no call logged at that time, the staff member said. Nothing from 309. Nothing at all. We showed them the app, the screenshot, the voicemail. They didn't know what to say. A week later, building maintenance sealed off 309 entirely, drilled the lock, reinforced the door, turned it into a storage space. They even removed the unit from the intercom list. That was the end of the calls. We stayed in that apartment for another 6 months, but the atmosphere never really felt right after that. Here's the part that still haunts me. 2 months after we moved out, I got a text from a guy who lived down the hall, someone I barely knew. It just said, "Did you ever hear back from Mr. Thomas?" I texted him back, asking what he meant. He said, "Last night I got a call. Front desk said someone in 309 was complaining about screams. I asked if he talked to the staff. He said they swore no such call had been made." He attached a screenshot. It showed a missed intercom call from apartment 309